The billionairess attends her high school reunion only to face the boy she left for dead. Amara Sinclair adjusted the flawless diamond bracelet on her wrist, the only piece of jewelry that didn't draw attention to her left hand. The other fingers were perfectly manicured, elegantly adorned, but the pinky remained bare, a silent testament to the night she'd waited too long. Numb from frostbite, it had never fully recovered, a permanent reminder of the minute she'd hesitated before calling for help. 19 years since the fire. 19 years since she'd last seen Jude Morgan. The Class of 2004, Forever in Our Hearts banner hung crookedly over the high school gymnasium entrance. Amara smoothed the emerald silk of her gown, a fortress against the ghosts and judgmental stares. She'd built Sinclair Sustainable Developments into a billion-dollar empire, not for the environmental accolades, but for the unspoken guilt that had haunted her since that night. Only in the privacy of her office, reviewing architectural plans for eco-farms, did she ever remove her gloves. Only then did the world see the truth her money tried to bury. She scanned the room, a sea of receding hairlines, carefully preserved facades, forced laughter. Then the world tilted. He stood by the punch table, a plastic cup in hand. Jude Morgan, not a ghost, solid. Wearing a slightly too large worn corduroy blazer over a collared shirt, his dark hair threaded with silver, his face etched with lines that hadn't been there at 18. But the eyes, those deep, calm brown pools that had once held her entire world, were unchanged. And he wasn't alone. He stood with the mayor, gesturing with a hand that bore the unmistakable scars of severe burns. Alive, the word shattered the hollow space behind her ribs where fear lived. Alive. The fire hadn't just scarred her pinky, it had erased Jude from her life, declared him dead in the official reports. Grief, sharp and fresh, warred with a terrifying, burgeoning hope. Then a reporter from the local paper sidled up, microphone thrust forward. "Miss Sinclair, your foundation's generous donation to Oakwood High's new gym? Any comment on the irony, given the tragedy here 19 years ago?" Amara forced her CEO smile, the one that never reached her eyes. "It's about honoring the past while building a safer future, Mark." Jude's voice, low and calm, cut through the forced pleasantries from across the room. "Actually, Mark, it's whom I left for dead, not who." He didn't look at Amara, his focus still on the mayor, but the correction landed like a physical blow. He always corrected her grammar, always. The intimacy of it, in this public space, after all this time, stole her breath. He remembered the petty, loving habit of their youth. Before she could process it, Amara approached Jude. "Your work with the firehouse is remarkable," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her gloved hands. "I'd like to offer a substantial grant for equipment and training." Jude finally turned fully to her. His gaze was steady, unreadable. "Your luxury eco-farm sits on my mother's grave," he said quietly, sliding a soil sample across the table. The contrast was stark. Amara's pristine gloved hands resting on her lap, Jude's permanently scarred fingers, the mark of a man who lived with fire every day. "This is from the Sinclair estate, the same soil where she's buried." Amara froze. Her father had purchased the land for her development project, claiming it was vacant. She'd never known there was a grave there. I didn't know," she stammered. "Of course you didn't," Jude said, his voice devoid of malice but heavy with unspoken history. "Your father made sure of that." He saw the flicker of pain in her eyes and added softer, "But ignorance doesn't change the truth." Before Amara could respond, a drunk classmate stumbled near the dance floor. A candle tipped over, igniting a small blaze on the tablecloth. A collective gasp rippled through the nearby crowd. Humiliation burned hotter than any flame she remembered. She froze, the familiar panic rising, the choking smoke, the heat, the feeling of being trapped. A shadow fell over her. Jude. Without a word, without even a flicker of the anger she expected, he stamped out the flames with his boot, then offered her his untouched drink. "Still can't stand the smell of smoke, can you?" he asked, his voice low and rough, meant only for her. Amara stared at him, the scent of smoke momentarily overwhelming the reunion hall's perfume and punch. It triggered a visceral flashback. The acrid tang of chemicals filled the old barn as Amara struggled with the heavy can of cleaning solution. Jude's mother was in the house, unaware they were inventorying the storage area after hours. Jude grabbed Amara's arm as she lost her grip. The can crashed to the floor, liquid spreading toward the old furnace. Jude pulled her to the door, shouting for her mother, but she was still inside, looking for her dog. Jude ran back in. Amara froze, panic seizing her. By the time she called 911, it was too late. The deafening roar of flames, the choking smoke, the searing heat. Then darkness. Waking in the hospital, bandaged, alone, told Jude hadn't made it out. The crushing weight of believing she'd killed him with her carelessness and her silence. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. Jude met her gaze, his eyes holding no judgment, but only profound sorrow. He'd seen her face the fire, literally and figuratively. The DJ chose that moment to play their senior prom song, Forever Young by Alphaville. As the opening notes filled the room, Jude's phone lit up with a notification. He glanced at it, then back at Amara, his expression unreadable. The screen glowed bright enough for her to see the headline, "Price Reduced, Sinclair Estate." The Zillow alert burned into her vision like a brand. Price reduced. Her father must be desperate to sell the remaining parcels of land. The Sinclair Estate, her billion-dollar development project, was built on ground Jude claimed held his mother's grave. And now the price was coming down, putting even more pressure on her to complete the development. The truth never dies, but would it ever learn mercy for her? The scent of burnt coffee hung heavy in Jude's cramped office at Station 17. Amara sat rigidly in a plastic chair, the only visitor amidst rows of fire gear lockers. Jude stood by a whiteboard covered in training schedules, not lecturing, but listening. The contrast was stark. Amara's pristine gloved hands resting on her lap, Jude's permanently scarred fingers, the mark of a man who lived with fire every day. "You want to fund my firehouse?" Jude asked, wiping chalk dust from his hands. "Guilt? PR for Sinclair Sustainable?"
"Both," Amara admitted, the honesty raw. She removed her left glove, placing it deliberately on the desk. The scarred pinky, pale and twisted, lay exposed. "But mostly because I need to understand what really happened that night. I've carried this for 19 years. Let me finally bear it." Jude studied her, his scarred fingers tapping a silent rhythm on the desk. "Money can't buy back what was lost, Amara. Not my mother's grave, not my home, not the truth." "Then what can I do?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Tour the development with me," Jude said. "See what you buried. Not just the land, but the memories, the history, the people your father erased to build your empire." Amara hesitated. She'd never visited the full property, only the model homes and sales offices. Her father had handled all the land acquisition. "Okay," she said finally. tomorrow. The Sinclair estate sprawled across 200 acres of what had once been rolling farmland. As Jude drove them through the property in his fire department SUV, Amara saw it with new eyes. "Your father purchased this land from the county after they seized it from my family. They claimed my mother had fallen behind on taxes, but she'd paid them for 30 years. The records were lost, conveniently, right? After she refused to sell to Sinclair Industries." Amara's stomach churned. She'd always believed her father had acquired the land legally. "I didn't know," she said again, the words feeling hollow. Jude pulled up to a structure that made Amara's blood run cold. A barn, identical to the one that had burned 19 years ago, the one where Jude's mother had died. "You rebuilt your crime scene," Jude said, a dark laugh escaping him. "How poetic. You turned the place where my mother died into a nostalgic centerpiece for your wealthy clients." Amara felt the world spin. She'd never known the original barn's significance. Her architects had simply designed a rustic gathering space to appeal to buyers' sense of heritage. "I swear I didn't know," she whispered. Jude turned to her, his eyes blazing. "You never knew anything, did you? You lived in your mansion on the hill while your father worked 3 jobs to keep that farm running. You dated me in secret while your father plotted to take everything from us, and when the fire happened, you let them declare me dead so you wouldn't have to face what your family did." "I thought you were dead," Amara cried. "They told me. Everyone told me. I was in the hospital for weeks. When I got out, your family said you never made it out. I grieved. I buried myself in work to forget. I never knew you survived." Jude's expression softened slightly. "I was in a coma for 6 months. When I woke up, your father paid off the hospital bills and told me if I ever contacted you again, he'd make sure I disappeared for real. He said you were better off believing I was dead." The revelation hit Amara like a physical blow. Her father had orchestrated the entire cover-up. He'd let her believe Jude was dead to keep her from discovering the truth about the land. "I'm so sorry," she choked out. Before Jude could respond, Amara's phone buzzed insistently. A news alert. The headline screamed, "Sinclair billionaires past. Jude Morgan arrested for arson 19 years ago." The story detailed Jude's arrest record, the night of the fire. He'd been charged with arson but released when the case was ruled accidental. Jude's phone buzzed the same instant. He looked at the screen, his face ashen. "They're coming for me," he whispered. "Your father's finally making his move." Amara understood immediately. If Jude's arrest record resurfaced, it would destroy his credibility. The press would paint him as the unstable arsonist trying to extort a billionaire. "I can silence them," she said. "I have connections at the paper. I can get the story killed." Jude shook his head. "At what cost?" Amara took a deep breath. "I have to admit, I knew my father's payoff, that I knew you were alive, that I've been complicit in hiding the truth all these years. My reputation, my company, it would all crumble." Jude met her gaze, the weight of a lifetime of pain in his eyes. "Is your need for absolution worth destroying everything you've built?" Amara felt the confession die on her lips, replaced by a colder, sharper fear. The Sinclair estate was her life's work, her redemption for the guilt she had carried. Could she really throw it all away? As she stood there paralyzed by indecision, a plume of smoke rose from one of the model homes. Flames licked at the windows. Someone had set fire to the showcase property. Without a word, Jude ran toward the burning building, not to save it, Amara realized with horror, but to retrieve something from the master bedroom. Jude emerged from the smoke-filled model home, coughing but unharmed, clutching a charred wooden box. Amara ran to him, relief flooding through her. "What were you thinking? You could have been killed." Jude held up the box, his voice hoarse.
This is why I ran in. This is proof. Inside the box, protected by a metal lining, were documents, property records, tax payments, letters from Jude's mother pleading with the county to correct their records, and a photograph of a woman standing by a grave marker on the Sinclair estate land. That's my mother's grave, right where your main sales office now stands. She's buried there with her parents. The Sinclair estate was never vacant land. It was a family cemetery. Amara stared at the photograph, tears streaming down her face. Her entire development, the eco-farms, the luxury homes, the sustainable future, was built on a grave, on stolen land, on lies. "I have to make this right," she said, the words firm despite her trembling voice.
The next morning, Amara sat in her sleek downtown office, the charred wooden box on her desk. She called her father, her voice steady. "Dad, I know the truth about the Sinclair estate. I know about Jude Morgan. I know about the payoff." There was a long silence on the other end. "Amara, listen. No, I'm signing the land back to Jude, all of it. The development is over." "You can't do that," her father shouted. "That property is worth billions, your entire company." "My company was built on a lie, on stolen land, on a grave. I won't profit from that anymore." She hung up and began drafting the legal documents, but she added one condition. The graves stay. The farm becomes a memorial. 2 weeks later, Amara stood on the Sinclair estate, now the Morgan Memorial Farm, with Jude by her side. The class of 2004, Forever in Our Hearts banner from the reunion felt a world away, its irony finally understood. Legends weren't the untouchable. They were the ones who rose from the ashes. Amara held the legal documents in her gloved hands. "I'm signing the land back to you, all of it, but with one condition. The graves stay. The farm becomes a memorial to your mother and all those buried here." Jude took the papers, his scarred fingers tracing the signature line. Then, without a word, he tore the check she'd prepared in half, but kept the deed. Amara's heart sank. "You're not taking it?" "I'm not your charity case, Amara. I don't want your money. I want justice, and I want to build something that honors my mother's memory." Over the next 6 months, Jude transformed the property. He kept the sustainable farming practices, but repurposed the model homes into a burn recovery center. The nostalgic centerpiece barn became a community space for survivors of fire-related trauma. And at the center of it all, he established a memorial garden for those buried on the land. The grand opening was modest but meaningful. Local officials, fire survivors, and community members gathered to celebrate. Amara stood near the back, watching as Jude gave a speech about healing and second chances. Then she saw him, the drunk classmate from the reunion, now in a firefighter's uniform, his hands wrapped in bandages. He approached Jude with tears in his eyes. "I was first responder on the model home fire. I got too close trying to put it out. Third-degree burns on both hands." Jude didn't hesitate. He wrapped an arm around the young firefighter's shoulders. "You're our first official patient," he said. "We'll get you through this." As the ceremony concluded, Amara approached Jude. She held out a mason jar filled with dark soil. "This is from your mother's grave. I took it the first time I visited after learning the truth." Jude took the jar, his scarred fingers brushing against Amara's gloved hand. Without a word, he walked to the foundation of the new community center being built on the property. He poured the soil into the wet concrete, then returned to Amara. He pressed the empty jar into her palm, his thumbprint over her frostbitten finger. Two kinds of scars finally touching. The truth never dies. But standing there, the cool glass of the mason jar warming in her hand, Amara felt for the first time its hard-won, fragile mercy. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the space to breathe, to build, to believe that even from the deepest ashes, something new and true could rise. She turned away from the foundation, leaving the mason jar in Jude's hand, and walked out into the sunlight, her hand unclenched, finally open.
At the dedication of the new community center, Amara found Jude standing by the memorial garden. He was placing flowers at the freshly marked grave of his mother, now properly acknowledged and restored. "You didn't have to do this," Jude said, nodding toward the restored grave sites. "You could have walked away." Amara looked at the ring on her finger, a simple silver band she'd found in Jude's things after the reunion. "I thought I did walk away," she said quietly. "For 19 years. But the truth never dies, Jude. It just waits." Jude studied her, his scarred hand reaching out to touch the frostbitten pinky she no longer tried to hide. "You know, when I woke up from the coma, I thought you had abandoned me, that you chose your family over us." Amara's eyes filled with tears. "And I thought you were dead, that I'd killed you with my silence." They stood in silence, watching as construction workers laid the foundation for the new community center. The Sinclair estate was gone, replaced by something better, something true. Jude finally broke the silence. "Your father called me yesterday, offered me a settlement to keep quiet about everything." "What did you say?" Amara asked, though she already knew the answer. "I told him the truth doesn't come with a price tag." Jude smiled for the first time since she'd seen him at the reunion. "But I did ask him one question." "What was that?" "I asked him if he ever considered that the fire that night wasn't the one that destroyed everything." Jude met her gaze. The real fire was the one he started when he decided to bury the truth. Amara looked at the foundation being poured, at the mason jar resting on a nearby bench, at Jude's scarred hand holding hers. "Some fires," she said softly, "are meant to be remembered, not to burn, but to light the way forward."